to thank Sammy for using guilt on me there. He knows as a Catholic that works very well with me. We've all got PhDs in guilt. Morning everyone, thank you for coming along. It's a great honour to have been invited along to this, the fourth conference of Glasgow Friends of Israel. I have to begin with one explanation and one apology. Sammy slightly touched on the apology. The explanation is, I should say from the outset that I speak here for myself, not for anyone else, and so my views and my analysis shouldn't be construed to represent the views of any publication that I write for. I suppose in Twitter speak that is views are my own, that's how it goes. The apology, as Sammy's mentioned, is that ironically enough, the very business we're here to talk about today, news reporting, is why I have to leave quite quickly, because the Scottish National Party is holding its conference on the other side of the city. So after my remarks, I have to do a mad dash across the city to get there. Arriving late, but that would basically be early in Israeli time. So I think I can use that excuse. Sammy said I will take questions at the end. I will truncate my remarks slightly. I won't go as long as Bill, so that you have a chance for Q&A, because I'm sure you have much more interesting things to contribute than I do. I hope you can you hear this? One other piece of housekeeping before I get to those remarks. I want to say that the work that organisations like Glasgow Friends of Israel do is important, but it's underappreciated. Any group is to be encouraged that is committed to working across communities, across faith groups, across political and social and cultural divides, to celebrate Israel, to defend Israel, and to advance the cause of peace in the Middle East and cooperation between communities around the world. Pro-Israel advocacy is never easy, which is why those of you who are members of Glasgow Friends of Israel, I think there's probably quite a lot of you in this room, should be congratulated. Not least Sammy Stein, who, since we're here to talk about media and how it reports on Israel and the conflict, it should be said that Sammy is a very effective advocate for fairness in reporting on Israel. He engages with journalists, he provides information in all important context, he is a voice that journalists can reach out to for comment on events, and he does all this with good humour, with respect and an appreciation that reporting on a conflict that is as complex as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not easy, and it's seldom straightforward. But the way that Sammy goes about what he does, I think is a credit to him, it's a credit to the organisation. So thank you, Sammy. So the questions that present themselves then are, does Sammy have to do what he does, and why? I think we have to begin with an acknowledgement that we're all biased in one way or another. I think objectivity is a fool's errand. We're not robots, we're all human beings. We have shade and colour, and we have perspectives that inform us. Even in straight news reporting, but especially in reporting a military/paramilitary conflict, it's not easy always to say, even after the fact, even long after the fact, what the objective truth was. There are different perspectives. I'm not advocating relativism by any means. I'm merely saying the truth can be often difficult to detect or to pin down. I think what we should be going for instead of objectivity or unbiased reporting, as you might say, is we should focus on fairness, on proportion, and on balance. I imagine many people in this room consider all three to be lacking from the coverage of Israel in the Western media, not least the BBC is often cited. I'm not going to say that any one outlet is biased or otherwise. While I think that reporting in Israel is more problematic at some institutions than others, you can probably guess some of those, I consider the larger issue to be one of the culture of the news business. So, where do the problems in Western media coverage of Israel focus? I think most important of all is the question of framing. And I imagine you'll probably hear more about framing from other speakers today. The social scientist George Lakoff writes that framing is about getting language that fits your worldview. It's not just language, the ideas are primary, and the language carries those ideas and evokes those ideas. So, all mediated conflicts, that is, conflicts in which the reporting of the events end up becoming almost as important as the events themselves, and the fight over how events are reported ends up becoming as important as the actual physical fight. In all those conflicts, resources, territory, regional dominance, political and other factors are absolutely central, but you will always come back to how the media reports it, how it's scored, how the umpire calls the game. Professor Todd Gitlin, who's written extensively about this, comes from a sort of left-wing perspective, argues that media frames, largely unspoken and unacknowledged, organise the world both for journalists who report it and in some important degree for those who rely on those reports. Media frames are persistent patterns of cognition, interpretation, and presentation, of selection, emphasis, and exclusion. That word exclusion is important. By which symbol handlers routinely organise discourse, whether verbal or visual. That sounds all very interesting, and that's the theory, but how does it actually work in practice? I think for one of the most stark examples of how framing works, we're indebted to Michael Grade, who's the former chairman of the BBC, and now a member of the House of Lords. During a 2017 House of Lords debate on the centenary of the Balfour Declaration, Lord Grade made this observation. He said, on the 16th of June of last year, 2 Palestinians, unprovoked, attacked Israeli border officers in Jerusalem with guns and knives, while a third stabbed to death the border police staff sergeant Hadass Malka, who was aged 23. The BBC's headline on its news website was, quote, 3 Palestinians killed after deadly stabbing in Jerusalem. The BBC, as Grade goes on to say, eventually changed its headline to Israeli policewomen stabbed to death in Jerusalem. As Grade then points out, the BBC accepted its mistake and subsequently changed it. He said he was not, accusing BBC journalists of anti-Semitism, but merely pointing out this example demonstrates the drip effect of unqualified, uncontextualised singling out of Israel for criticism. And as he concluded, if the BBC can get this wrong, it's little wonder that Israel finds it so hard to put aside the idea that some of its critics are motivated by something more sinister than political commentary. Now, from the former chairman of the BBC, those are pretty bracing words. You'll hear more today, no doubt, about headlines like that. There are many of them. I think we can probably, around Operation Protective Edge, Operation Cast Lead. I would also say the murder of the Fogel family in Itamar. There were some, gold standard, to put it that way, examples of how not to write headlines that really did invert the victims and the victimisers of the events. Now, these are sadly not as uncommon as they should be. They reflect in many cases what I would call a set of assumptions about the conflict that are misplaced, misguided, and excessively simplistic. Similarly, an example from a few years ago now, the pro-Israel activists Hollander and Eni critiqued the mainstream media framing of the Nakba Day 2011, as it's called, when Palestinian, Lebanese and Syrian rioters attempted to storm the boundaries of Israel. CNN, these activists who were at the time affiliated with Camera, the organisation Camera, they argued that the CNN, for example, blamed the violence on Israeli provocation. So CNN, in its reporting on these riots, kept referring to the fact that a mosque in East Jerusalem, I apologise, a synagogue in East Jerusalem had been rededicated, I think about a week previously, and ignored the calls from Hamas and Fatah for the uprising and the Palestinian Authority's recent naming of a public space in honour of a Palestinian terrorist who had murdered 38 Israeli civilians.
The omission of information that supports Israel or weakens its enemy's case is a common function of negative framing of Israel. Framing can be the product of how journalists operate, and we'll talk about that a lot today. It can also be not just how journalists use frames, but how journalists are used to promote frames. And I think this is an important point to note. There was a study done on this in 2007 by two journalists and academics, Calvin Sivetz. They looked at the Israel-Hezbollah war of 2006, and they concluded that the problem wasn't so much ill-motivated media bias. The problem was that journalists were very effectively manipulated by Hezbollah, which was able to control a great deal of information. And it wasn't so much that journalists were, I think sometimes pro-Israel activists can make the mistake of thinking journalists are sitting there saying, how will we undermine the Zionist enemy today? It's really not how it works. But Calvin Sivetz actually look at how terrorist groups and regimes in the Middle East can essentially use their control over information against Israel. We hear a lot about asymmetric conflict, and as Calvin Sivetz argue that the asymmetrical nature of the conflict, you've got a traditional big army, conventionally armed state versus a non-traditional sub-state or non-state, means that while Israel faced leaks and disagreements common to an open society, and so you have ministers and members of Knesset openly questioning things on TV, you don't have that so much on the other side. And with Hezbollah was able, really through violence and force, to intimidate those who might, on their side, who might talk to journalists. So Calvin Sivetz argued that Hezbollah could impose an organisational message discipline that provided journalists with a smoother narrative. So Israel's actions were framed as disproportionate violence on an aggressor, when in fact Israel has defended itself in a conflict started by Hezbollah, which even the UN Security Council will recognise that Hezbollah started it. So far from the operator of a slick PR machine, and we hear a lot from sort of anti-Israel activists and anti-Zionist activists about the Hasbara operation. Hasbara is always said in scare quotes, and it's a scary term, and they're coming to brainwash you. Actually, both from Calvin Sivetz's study and my own observations, I would say that Israel's PR machine is not slick at all. And I see Hadar just shaking her head in the front row there. It's really not. And this is a fine example of how Israel can often be outframed by a terrorist organisation. More recently, we saw this again with how framing works against Israel and the events. The deaths of 62 Palestinians on the Gaza boundary clashes with the IDF a few months ago. The events were framed as a mass killing of protesters by Israel, rather than a violent riot to which children were unforgivably brought along. And the die was cast at that point. It didn't matter the subsequent revelation by Hamas, no less, that 50 of the casualties were its members. It came too late. The frame had already been fixed. The issue had been framed, people had made up their mind based on it, people move on. We live in a very fast 24/7 news cycle. People don't have time to go back and reassess these things and say, well actually, these people were members of Hamas, these people were members of Palestine Islamic Jihad. People remember from something else, Donald Trump's tweeted something, or something's happened. I think another important function of how Israel can be misreported is story selection. So what gets reported, what doesn't, and why? There's I think a really interesting study that was done, again this was a few years ago, but a commentator noted that in the 12 tumultuous months leading up to the Arab Spring, political and other tensions are rising in Egypt, in Libya, and Tunisia. The BBC and newspaper coverage of the region was overwhelmingly still devoted to Israel. So this observer noted that, quote, at the BBC News website, news coverage of the Arab countries combined and doubled still amounted to less than half of what was written about Israel. At The Guardian and the Daily Telegraph, News coverage of the Arab countries combined and tripled still amounted to less than was written about Israel. BBC Middle East editor Jeremy Bowen devoted 95% of his coverage to the four countries, more to the four countries than to Israel than to those four countries. So even when events are happening elsewhere, Israel still seems to be the story. What doesn't get covered? Why does the prison sentence of Ahed Tamimi, the Palestinian teenager who slapped two Israeli soldiers, attract more coverage than the murder of Ari Fold of blessed memory, an Israeli man who was stabbed to death at Gush Etzion Junction? Why is Tamimi the face of oppressed uprising and a people demanding justice, but Fold was simply another dead settler? This is, once again, and I say once again because you'll have all heard it before, is the David versus Goliath mentality. Israel is the larger military force, and we shouldn't deny that. Israel does have a disproportionate amount of force and military capability compared to the Palestinians. But Israel is seen, therefore, as the aggressor, the Palestinians as the underdog. And journalists, quite frankly, often see ourselves as champions of the underdog. I'm not sure that's always correct. I think we probably do have an inflated sense of our place in these things. And politics doesn't pinch too. Many of those who work in my industry, are left liberal generally in their views, and they reflect that political inclination. They reflect the dominant perspectives of this worldview. In this worldview, the Palestinians, I would argue, and I'm someone who considers himself, I consider myself to be a liberal. I think too many liberals treat the Palestinians in an appalling way. Actually, Palestinians are so rarely given agency. They are so rarely allowed to be responsible for their actions. They're spoken about in ways that, in other contexts, we would have no problem saying that was xenophobic, if not racist. Palestinians are spoken about, not even as children, but sometimes as almost objects, that they have no agency, that they are people that things happen to, rather than people just like their neighbours, the Israelis. That frame may come from what those who are responsible for it think is a progressive place. I don't think it really is progressive at all. I think it really does the Palestinians a great disservice, and it doesn't capture the diversity and sort of multifaceted nature of Palestinian society. And the flip side, talking about Ari Fold, is that Israelis are seen as aggressors, and if they commit the crime in the eyes of the international media and the international community of living in Judea and Samaria, they are dangerous fanatics. They are behaving provocatively. That is a frame that's difficult to break. Towards the end, I'll give some suggestions to counter these narratives, but it's very difficult. But if you have not just the international media, but international institutions, academia, political movements, if they have this frame set in their mind that the cause of the conflict is the existence of the State of Israel, or it's Israel's presence over the Green Line, or it's the building of settlements, or the extension of settlements, rather than Palestinian rejectionism or Palestinian violence and anti-Semitism, that is difficult to break. Essentially, you just have to keep battering away. You really just have to keep saying, no, we're not going to go along with this narrative. This is much more complex. Complexity, and on both sides of the conflict, advocates for both the Palestinians and the Israelis often try to remove the complexity from it. It's a complex conflict. Don't try to pretend that it can be explained in a 280-character tweet. It can't be explained in a quirky 5-minute YouTube video. Embrace complexity and argue intelligently. What are the motivations and the causes of this reporting? And I imagine a lot of people are interested in that. Yes, there are those who are actively ill-motivated towards Israel. I would argue they're small in number. I don't propose to dwell on them. I think most of you probably know the kind of people that we're talking about. I think a slightly larger proportion and more interesting is accounted for by the activist nature of a lot of journalism. Simply put, there are journalists who see themselves as participants in events rather than dispassionate recorders, and that is a genuine debate within journalism and journalism theory, and they view their role as championing certain values. They wouldn't necessarily see this as partiality, because they believe that that is what journalism is about, challenging the powerful. And Israel, as we've said, they see the Palestinians as the more powerful actor. The next stage up is ignorance. Too many journalists know too little about Israel and Palestine, the history, the politics, the military situation. I'm not speaking of Middle East correspondents or those who report on the ground or those even outside the Middle East who are well versed in the conflict. I'm referring to journalists outside who are generalists, so reporters, producers, editors who make decisions or write stories or cut news packages in London or Paris or New York or whatever. The news industry has changed hugely in recent years, and the balance has tipped in favour of generalists and away from specialists. This is not a satisfying explanation, and I understand that, but a significant portion of the problematic reporting in Israel is a result of a lack of resources. Many news outlets, for economic reasons, you simply can no longer afford to retain large stables of specialists. Moreover, the 24-hour nature of news means when a story breaks, it almost certainly won't be a specialist reporting it. If tomorrow a flotilla carrying, amongst others, Scottish pro-Palestinian activists was to be intercepted by the IDF or by the Israeli Navy off the coast of Gaza, the first report that you would read about it, most likely in whatever Scottish news source you go to, the first one would probably have been written not from Jerusalem, not from Tel Aviv, it would have been written by a young, probably recent graduate who is most likely a freelancer working an early shift in a Glasgow newsroom or an Edinburgh newsroom. This is just the nature of how journalism works now. They would rely on wire copy from PA or the AP or Agence France, because most likely they have little knowledge of or even interest in Israel and Palestine. That is an even bigger problem to fix. You can sort of argue until you're blue in the face about frames and about what's covered and what's not covered, when it is a question of resources. And this isn't true for all organisations, but for a lot of media organisations, the money simply isn't there to do the kind of in-depth reporting and to retain the kind of journalistic resources, so that when something, and something happens, if, for example, if there's another border clash, that you have somebody to hand who knows about the last 10 border clashes, and who knows about the terror tunnels and the rockets, and who knows about the breaches of the fence. I'm going to conclude so I can take your questions now, but just a couple of points on what should be done. I would say, first of all, activism is very important. Do what you do, record, dispute, challenge where you think things are wrong. I would say it's very important to do that respectfully. I think there are those activists of all kinds and all sort of conflicts and causes who can be very aggressive towards the media. That never works. It just encourages people to kind of close off. You know yourself, if you're under attack, your defences go up. Do it respectfully. Do it the way Sammy does it. Understand that this is very complex, and that there aren't people sitting around a table rubbing their hands, sort of doing this deliberately. I mean, the other thing as well is be your own media. We've seen the rise of alternative media for good or for ill these days. Here's an example where it can be for good, by getting the information out there. I'm not keen on the idea of citizen journalism purely for the reason that I wouldn't like to go to a citizen dentist or a citizen surgeon. I would like to retain the services of a citizen solicitor. But as information activists, as people going out there saying, look what's actually happening on the ground in Israel, look at, you can You can go to shops in East Jerusalem and you will find Israelis and Palestinians, Jews and Arabs shopping together. You will find their children playing together. You will find them going to school together, and they're having their school plays together. You will find Israeli Arabs serving in the IDF and serving loyally and bravely and nobly. And I have to say that Israeli Arabs who serve in the IDF, I think, are amongst the most inspirational people that you can find in the IDF. Tell those stories. Don't just sit back and wait for what Jeremy Bowen wants to say. And I don't mean that as a personal slight to him, but don't just sit and wait for what you are, BBC's going to report. Be your own media. Tell the stories that you know about. Honesty is important too. We have to be honest when we say that Israel is portrayed unfairly. Look at what happens to the countries about it. We have to accept that Israel is probably not going to be judged by the same standards as Syria or Lebanon. Most Western journals are going to judge it by the standards of Denmark, or by the standards of Britain, or by the standards of Canada. And we do have to be honest. There are things Israel does that are wrong. There are things that Israel gets very, very wrong. And you have to resist the temptation to jump on every instance of that as bias. I wrote something recently about the nation-state law, which was really sort of explaining that it's more nuanced than you think, but there's lots of problems with it, and downgrading the status of Arabic is, I think, a very bad idea. I was sort of shocked, though, once that piece went out, that there was a pro-Israel activist saying, this is just terrible anti-Israel propaganda, it's typical of the media. I thought, if you look at any of my output and you think I'm sort of a typical, anti-Israel person, I don't know what you're I think Caroline Glick might be, too left-wing for you as well. You have to be you have to try and be fair-minded and accept that there are some criticism is going to be legitimate. Final thing is courage. It is not easy to do this. It's not easy to do what Sammy does. It's not easy to do what most of you in this room do. It takes courage. And look, it's very difficult to be a Zionist in Britain today. To be Jewish in Britain today is very difficult. Obviously that's to do with domestic politics in this country, but more broadly we are seeing anti-Semitism and certainly anti-Zionism rise across the world. So yes, it does take bravery. You have to remember though that emet truth is at the centre of what you do. And as long as you have the truth on your side, and as long as you're committed to truth, they can come after you all they like, they can do whatever you like. You will win in the end. So I just want to thank you very much for inviting me, and I can take your questions if you have time for them.
Yes, we have time. Okay, we'll start at the front.
So
you might want to stand up so we can hear you.
when you talk about journalists like Jeremy Bowen, how much independent license do journalists get working for BBC, for example? If somebody's got that's the question. How much independent license do they get?
Very unsatisfying answer, but it depends. It does depend from journalist to journalist, and from newsroom to newsroom. Now there are some journalists like Jeremy Bowen who is a named journalist, he's a star journalist, and so probably, although I can't speak with any first-hand knowledge, my reading of it is he will probably get more deference from editors and probably gets more of a longer leash because he's a veteran and he's been there for a long time and done lots of things. I think the subtext of your question is maybe is there a way that this can be regulated so that there aren't if you like bad apples going off. I mean, possibly there are codes of ethics. There are reporting and journalistic policies that different organisations have. Sometimes those fall down, sometimes they're not applied as they should be, and sometimes it's actually difficult to do that in journalism. It's a creative industry. Probably some of you think it's more creative than it ought to be when it comes to reporting news, but it's difficult to impose those kind of structures on people. It's not a production line, so you do have to give people room to breathe, and sometimes that means that there are some who can sort of abuse that. I don't want to sort of be sort of personal or sort of ad hominem towards Jeremy Bowen. He's respected by his peers. He's done the job for a long time. He's not my favourite journalist, because of a lot of his reporting on Israel. But yes, I wouldn't. Don't assume that it's just he's allowed to sort of go wild and do whatever he does. He's worked in this field for a long, long time, and I think you can imagine there's a sense that he has earned, the opportunity to go out there and report. As I say, I don't like a lot of the way he reports it. Thanks very much.
Okay.
As a journalist, do you know other colleagues that, whilst they understand the bias against Israel, they see the injustice, but they continue to write for the other side because they don't want to step out of the comfort zone. You talk about the courage, they don't want to, maybe they want to have it, but they can't write about it. Do you find that as a general rule?
That's a very interesting question, thank you. I think I don't know if I do know anyone in that situation. I mean, I do know of colleagues who are certainly are more sympathetic to Israel, but think, I best not bring that up. And I think sort of, although this person's never been a colleague of mine, but Melanie Phillips has written about this, and when she wrote for The Guardian, and was sort of seen as it was just a bit of a cuckoo in the nest that she was in The Guardian news conferences, and I don't know, but the honest answer is I don't know personally of anyone in that situation. The thing I would just underline, and I mentioned it in the talk, is don't assume that everyone who's writing about it is really interested in the subject. Lots of people who write about or who report on Israel and Palestine, they're doing it because it's a job. They're not doing it because they're sort of cared about this issue for many, many years. For a lot of people, it's not an intentional bias, it's incidental. Thank you.
Take a question from the back now.
Mr. Daisley, do you
Speak
feel
up so you can hear.
anyway by the National Union of Journalists? I'm assuming that you're probably a member of the National Union of Journalists. With the guidelines that they issue, do you feel under any kind of constraint?
Well, I should say I'm actually not a member of the NUJ, so I don't know. I couldn't really speak to how that operates, I'm afraid.
I think in general terms, though, that the journalists unions do drive politics a certain way for their members.
I have to say I've never heard of any example of the NUJ. I'm not a fan of the organisation, but I've never heard of it in any way interfering in editorial policy or in reporting. No, I've never come across that.
Debbie?
Yeah, I guess it's
Could you stand up, Debbie?
Yeah, I guess it's an add-on to the questions about, do you think the domestic political situation is having an impact on how on the reporting that we're seeing?
Yes, this is something I've been thinking about a lot, actually, and I've been meaning to write something about it. This isn't scientific, this is just an observation. I find the rise of Jeremy Corbyn and what's happening in the Labour Party, I find a lot of journalists, friends and colleagues have come to me and said, I haven't really thought as deeply about this issue as I thought I had. I didn't realise that was anti-Semitic, for example, the sort of Job loyalty, for example, that to all of us, we sort of say, that's obviously anti-Semitism, but a lot of the way that Ruth Smith and others are spoken about. I have journalistic colleagues come to me and say, I wouldn't even have thought of that, just because they don't know a great deal about the history of anti-Semitism, they don't know a great deal about Israel. And so I think, as much as what's happening in the Labour Party is absolutely deplorable, I think the only sort of silver lining that I can see is in journalism. I have noticed quite a number of journalists whose, I'm not saying they're going to come out tomorrow and start saying, I'm going to wave an Israeli flag and, say, annex Hebron now or anything like that, but they're going to, they recognise the problem much more deeply than they did before.
I'm going to let, okay, Judy, last one.
Oh.
Okay.
Then I shall have to literally fly.
I recall when the war on Iraq was going on, that on the BBC and I think other outlets, anybody who was reporting from Iraq, the comment would be made, this is not a free report, the person has to behave as the Iraqi authorities would wish them to. We never get that in relation to Hamas in Gaza or indeed on the West Bank. Is there any way that we could get that as an approach to reporting?
I mean, I don't know. I think that it's certainly something that you could form a plank of activism. You know, if you're, if you're sort of engaging with a news organisation, whether it's the BBC or whoever, and you know, use that as an example. I think it's certainly in Gaza. I think it very much there's a very strong case for that because there is very little in the way of well. It's much more difficult, put it this way, it's much more difficult to report from Gaza and criticise the authorities there than it is to report from Tel Aviv and criticise the authorities there. I think it's something, I think it's actually a good idea.